Welcome. I am your host, Cindy, and excited to have you here. Today, we're talking with Alyssa Devine about negotiating IP protection for creatives. Kind of an interesting topic. And it's great to have you here, Alyssa. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And thank you for inviting me today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, me too. I don't know a lot about IP. I always shied away from it, but I know it's important. And for our listeners out there, if you don't know Alyssa, she is the founder and managing attorney of Purple Fox Legal, which I love. We're going to have to find out what that's about. And she's created a unique law firm focused on intellectual property law, but specifically for creatives and entrepreneurs. And Alyssa's not only a lawyer, but has also earned an MBA from Indiana University. And she's been spotlighted for accomplishments by Indiana University, the Robert McKinney School of Law. And she also enjoys giving back, which I love, through volunteering. She was awarded the Norman Lefstein Award of Excellence for volunteering over 500 pro bono hours. So hats off to you, Alyssa. And why don't you tell us, how did you come to do this work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I originally entered law school thinking I would be a criminal prosecutor, believe it or not. So that was sort of step one. And I went to a lot of different lectures and talked to a lot of different attorneys, and I kept coming back to intellectual property. And as I continued to attend these lectures and do informational interviews, I discovered that intellectual property is very, very closely connected with business principles.
Yeah.
You sort of had to understand both to give the best service. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I enrolled in the joint JD MBA program at Indiana University and had no social life for 4 years.
I bet you overachiever.
Yeah, to complete that program, but it was very worthwhile. I was able to do a lot of different experiences in both programs that helped my overall understanding of how to best serve clients. And I also realized that there are many, many times where the best business decision is not the best legal decision, or vice versa. And really, as an attorney, it's my job, my role, to educate my clients so that they can make an informed decision, but I cannot make that decision for them.
Yeah, that's quite a negotiation. I'm going to want to circle back to that. But I wondered, how did you come to focus on creatives? It's funny, when most people think of intellectual property, they immediately picture big business. So I love that you've taken that niche area of law. And, as someone, I like to think of myself as a creative. How did you come to focus on that group?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that intellectual property is misunderstood by society and by the legal community in some aspect. So there are really 5 types of intellectual property. Patents is always the first one people think about, but there's also trademarks and trade secrets, copyrights, and publicity rights, which is sort of the one I think gets left behind quite a bit because it is state-based and the rules vary, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But there are 5 types of intellectual property. And at the end of the day, 4 of those, I would argue, play an essential role in small business, with the exception of patents maybe not having quite as much interaction with small business, but the other 4, absolutely.
Okay. And why is it so important to negotiate? It's the protection of IP. I think a lot of people don't consider it, especially creatives and small business owners. I think it's not on the radar typically. So tell us a bit about that.
So in order for creatives to, understand IP, recognize IP, they just have to educate themselves. And part of that is identifying credible sources of information. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of misinformation out there about intellectual property and about what businesses need when they're initially starting up. For example, trademark. Well, there are some websites that say they can get you a trademark registration in a couple of days. Well, that's not possible. The United States Patent and Trademark Office has a waiting period of at least 8 months, from the time you get your registration filed to the time it's assigned to a trademark examining attorney. So identifying credible sources of information and to help prioritize, okay, what do we really need to focus on here? So with, in trademarks, I think it's probably the first priority for creatives and small businesses, because you need to be able to protect your name, your personal name, and also, your business name, if that is different from, your surname.
Yeah. And
So
what do you consider a creative, if you don't mind me asking?
there's of course the traditional kind of concept of creatives, but in my mind, if you're an entrepreneur, you're an innovator, you're also a creative.
Yeah.
And part of that is because you have to be creative in how you do business because of limited resources.
Yeah.
And also you have to be extremely creative because we're in a post-pandemic world. We
Yeah.
cannot do things the same as we've always done. We have to do them differently or we will not succeed.
Yeah, that's true. Now, you've done some really interesting work in negotiating to protect deceased celebrities' brands. Can you tell us a bit about that? I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that even as a niche area, but obviously it is. So tell us, how'd you come to get it, and what, if you can share any details about that, that'd be fun.
Yeah, so that was one of my internship opportunities actually during law school. And I was fortunate enough to work at that intellectual property management company. And their specialty is to protect the intellectual property of deceased celebrities, people such as James Dean and Maya Angelou, Jackie Robinson. So, really, really big names. And it was very, very fascinating work. And it certainly solidified my passion to pursue, intellectual property as a career.
Yeah, that's more juicy than the typical law school internships you get, for sure. That's fascinating. And
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
who are you negotiating to protect it against, like the brand? Like when you say James D or Jackie Robinson, like what? Because again, it wouldn't have crossed my mind, but I can imagine everybody would want a piece of it. So tell us a little bit about that.
So part of it was the enforcement piece, making sure that people didn't have permission to use that intellectual property, whether it be the trademarks, right of publicity, those sorts of things. Making sure that people without permission aren't using them on like t-shirts and other things like that. But another big part of it was developing partnerships, strategic partnerships. So for example, with Jackie Robinson, figuring out the best way to create different campaigns with, the Dodgers and with the MLB, Major League
Yeah.
Baseball, things like that, figuring out how to make these people relevant today and
Yeah.
how to creatively, use these intellectual property to generate interest in this brand, but also the brand that we're partnering with.
Yeah.
Sort of things like that was very, very key in that role.
Yeah, fun, very fun. And circling back at the beginning, you were talking about how, sometimes the legal decision and the business decision are at odds a little bit, and you're having to sort of, I would say, negotiate with your clients, if you will, to make sure they have the information. What tips or strategies do you have for people out there, or any experiences you had around that, negotiating that relationship as well?
Well, I'll actually provide an example that illustrates this point really well. So, about a month ago, it's been a while, the Barbie movie came out.
Yeah.
Everybody's all about Barbie.
Yes.
They they have different Barbie inspired posts, Barbie inspired parties, Barbie inspired, what all these sorts of things. And I see this as an intellectual property attorney and I'm cringing
Oh,
because a lot of this is trademark infringement,
yeah.
but it's not in the best interest of Mattel to stop these people.
Yeah.
Why? Because they want them to go see the movie.
Yeah.
They want them, which turned out to be in their best interest because it's the revenues exceeded $1 billion for
Wow.
that movie. So, best legal decision would be to go after these infringers to stop this use. Best business decision is to let it go
Oh,
and get people to go to the movie,
yeah.
incentivize that. So, when I say they're at odds, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
That is
But
such a great example. Like, oh my gosh. And I'm cringing. The reason I'm smiling on the other side is I'm like, oh my gosh, I was guilty of that. Because to be honest, I did not expect to like them. I had no intention of seeing the movie. And everybody kept saying, Cindy, you're gonna love it. I'm like, you know me. And they're like, Cindy, trust me, you're gonna love it. And I went, and sure enough, I did love it. And I wrote a blog post about it, and it got picked up somewhere else. So I am probably one of those people who was infringing their IP, but helped promote the movie because I was very complimentary. So that's a perfect example. And for our listeners, just want to highlight as well, when we're negotiating, we often forget, sometimes we're so focused on the thing, right? Like protect IP in this case, or whatever that thing is you're negotiating about, whether in your personal life or your professional life. sometimes think about the outcomes that, we forget, whether it's a relationship outcome, that the relationship is worth saving, or maybe even though, as Alyssa was saying, it's a violation, it actually serves your interests. So that's a super example about that. I love that. And do you find most clients take your advice on that, or do you often end up butting heads? And if so, how do you handle that?
Sometimes I'll provide a recommendation and they usually will go that route. But other times I just lay out the consequences that I can foresee for each decision and just kind of lay it at their feet. Like, here's what happened if you do this, here's what will happen if you do that. Like,
Yeah,
it's up to you to prioritize, your values and what you want the outcome to be, to
yeah,
pick path A or path B.
yeah. Yeah, I like that idea actually for negotiating even more broadly, Alyssa, right? And again, for our listeners there, whether this, I always say all of life is a negotiation. So whether it's in your personal life or your professional life or any of the spaces in between, sometimes, rather than taking a hardcore position on something, laying out options and consequences for people, whether it's with your kids, I'm thinking of in particular, right? You lay out the consequences and allow people to make their choices so that I think those kinds of negotiations get better buy-in. So switching gears for a moment, I'd love if you could talk to us about internal communication strategies in business, right? Like how to communicate with employees, for example, or how to increase retention for the clients that you're dealing with or beyond.
I think the first step to either establishing good communication or improving communication is understanding yourself and who you're communicating with.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm very much aware that I'm an introvert and that I communicate best through writing and that I
Yeah.
learn best through, visual aids or by doing.
Yeah.
I know that about myself. So when I'm talking to somebody, I can get some different hints or clues to figure out, what their best communication is or
Yeah.
how they understand things. So some people are auditory. So when I send them an email explaining something briefly, that may not do the trick. We may need to do a phone call or a Zoom chat. And then once we have that, then they're like, okay, yes, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I think that's great advice. We often have to think about who we are negotiating with as well. I'm glad when you said you're an introvert, it immediately struck a chord with me because I tend to be more extroverted, have been all my life. And our firstborn, my daughter, definitely introverted. And it was eye-opening for me. I read the book Quiet, which was brilliant. I thought, I don't know if you've read it. I love it. And it gave me a whole different insight and appreciation. I think we're a very extrovert driven society. And we often don't allow the space, frankly, for introverts to make sure that their valuable input is included in the conversation. So I invite all of you to be really aware of who are you negotiating with, right? And who do you need to be to show up to be the best version of yourself and to get the best outcomes for yourself and for the other party that you're negotiating with. So I really love that. And what about increasing retention? That's a big conversation we hear a lot about today with post-COVID, right? First, we heard about the great resignation and, I like to think of it as the great reset. And as quickly as that was happening, we heard that there's a recession coming. So people are tightening their belts, but everybody's worried about, attracting, retaining top talent. Any tips on that?
I think this is something that's maybe people overthink this quite a bit. I think that it's more so simple, or at least it should be approached more simply. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what motivates your team and then rewarding their hard work with
Mm.
whatever motivates them. Kind of similar to understanding how people want to communicate. So, for example, some people are, well, I'd probably say most people are, incentivized to do better work, with, say, a bonus, some
Yeah.
money. Other people are happy with a pat on the back or some other sort of just kind of simple gesture, or maybe even just a thank you note.
Yeah.
Maybe other people want, an award at the annual corporate meeting or something like that,
Yeah.
recognition, widespread recognition throughout the company.
Yeah.
So it's not all about money. It's about rewarding people for their work and encouraging them to, take their own path on how they want to do things, not
Yeah.
micromanaging. Like,
Yeah.
if you give somebody a job, let them do that job.
Yeah.
Don't do it for them.
Yeah. That's so true. I was bad at that for a while. I mean, I had to recognize my control issues and and just get rid of them.
Yeah.
But I love that you're talking about this, that it's not all about money, because I mean, one of the things that prompted me to start the art of feminine negotiation, frankly, is that I think for so long we've defined success based on this very competitive model, this very win-lose model. Everything is about the almighty dollar, and there is never enough. It's like more, more, more. So I would love if you chat about how do you define success? I've been on a mission to say to people, we need to redefine and reframe how we look at what it means to be successful. What is success? What are your thoughts on that?
I think money can be a factor in the success equation, but not the entire thing.
Yeah.
For myself, I see success as the number of people that I've helped in one way or another.
Nice.
Obviously that's going to be clients, but also I've been very intentional lately about making strategic connections. So really like within my network. So for example, I had, one person in my network who was looking for, more than, vendors, suppliers. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, like, based on what they do, I actually know somebody over here that makes sense. Like, let's connect them and things like that. I'm trying to do better about connecting people and about maintaining and creating relationships for myself and for others,
Yeah.
because that's something I've always struggled on as an introvert.
Yeah.
And I think that developing the skill and sort of upskilling, as you might say, is how I define success. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm not, as much as I'd love to stay in school forever, I can't. So I'm learning a different way now.
Yeah. That's great. And I love that. Who's it said? Tony Robbins claims it is his, but he borrowed it from somebody else. If we're not growing, we're dying, right? And I think we often think I have to hit this pinnacle as if that's it. I mean, it's never a shame on us if we hit a pinnacle and then just stagnate, right? Things are ever changing, and I'm with you. I'm a big believer in lifelong learning as well. I get great joy in it. Now, what tips do you have on how to manage sort of big egos or strong personalities to, especially dealing with creatives, right? To find those more creative solutions amongst diverse personality types. Any tips on managing ego?
I encounter, bigger egos or maybe zealousness, I might say, with other attorneys most of the time. It's not my clients. So
Yes.
that can be difficult. Sometimes they're opposing counsel in litigation, which is, a whole nother thing. But just because we're opposing counsel in a pending matter doesn't mean respect is out the window.
Yeah.
At least that's my belief.
Yeah.
I've had some very, I'll say, unusual experiences with that. But at the end of the day, I can only control my behavior. I can't
Yeah.
control theirs or how they respond to things.
Yeah.
And I try to think to myself, okay, like if a judge or if like a news station saw what I wrote or what I said, like how would that be perceived on me? Because my reputation is the most important thing to me as an attorney. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can't ever get it back up to its original value. You can
Yeah.
try,
Yeah.
but it's very difficult.
Yeah. And it's funny because that's really at the heart of art of feminine negotiation. You've hit right on it, because it's all about, I think for effective negotiation, you need to be building rapport, building trust, building relationship, all about relationship. And I agree with you when so many lawyers, and I was guilty of this, to be honest. When I started, things have changed, but I was almost always the only woman. And it's like, we're so conditioned to believe that the only way to be taken seriously is to get scrappier, and with that comes this very confrontational approach that doesn't serve anybody. And that was one of my big epiphanies as well, is about the importance of really building relationship. And it took me right back to growing up. My dad was always like drilling into us, everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, right? That was one of my core values, and our legal profession often encourages the opposite. So
There's also the famous saying of, if you're good at arguing, you'll be a good lawyer. Well, I would contest that and challenge that quite a bit.
yes.
I think if you're good at arguing, you'd be a terrible lawyer,
Yeah.
because to me, the practice of law is not about arguing; it's about persuasion.
Yes.
You cannot persuade somebody that you're arguing with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful distinction, Alyssa. I really like that. And I'd say not just in law, but in life generally. So again, for all
Mhm.
of our listeners, right? When you are out to win the argument, we've been so conditioned to think the person talking the loudest and longest is winning the negotiation. And if you're not listening, you're losing, right? And it shouldn't be about winning or losing. It should be about finding better outcomes. And you're not going to do that when you're arguing. Now, representing creatives, I'm curious what role you think creativity plays in negotiation.
That's a much harder question. I let clients decide if they want to be at the forefront of negotiation. I, personally, I'd like to do it, but I think that's more from a point of I want to improve my skills by getting more practice.
Yeah.
If a client has already built rapport with somebody, on a deeper level than I ever could, then that makes sense and that's in their best interest for them to negotiate that transaction and for
Yeah.
me to draft that according to their conversation.
Yeah.
So it's going to depend on the client, but it's not necessarily even creatives. It's just different people have a different way of approaching things, and that's okay.
Yeah. And being open and listening, I think, is so important, right? I mean, again, we're so conditioned to think, okay, I want this, eye on the prize, right? You hear that over and over again, as opposed to don't just keep on your eye on the purported prize you want, but what does the other side need and why do they need it? And how can we maybe find something even better than what I thought I wanted by being, God forbid, a little vulnerable in the conversation, right? It can be such a powerful shift. So what do you think are the key? You'd mentioned about skills. What do you see as the key skills that make a great negotiator?
Preparation,
Yeah.
preparation and determining, what your client wants, what
Yeah.
your client needs, what your client wants, what the other side most likely needs and wants prior to the negotiation,
Yeah.
or maybe your client will tell you, figuring out what are sort of the things that could change in a contract versus things that need to stay the same,
Yeah.
what should be included. I use right of publicity licenses quite a bit in the things that I write. For example, just really with anything to do with marketing or website development, I think that that's important. That it's just important that we make sure we know who the owners of the intellectual property are,
Yeah.
and that if needed, we're getting the licenses for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So, Alyssa, what do you see as the key problems that are facing the legal industry today from a practicing perspective, and what can we do about it?
I think the biggest mistake that the legal industry is currently making is not meeting clients where they are. For
Mm,
example, if you follow the Leo legal trends reports
yeah.
closely, they indicate that we do, as a whole, we do a lot of things very badly, such as returning phone calls,
Yes.
returning emails, and things like that. So, and I've intentionally tried to be very transparent and cognizant of that when I am practicing. And my goal is to at least maybe not get the answer, but at least to respond to an email
Yeah.
or phone call within 24 or 48 hours, sooner if possible. And I also allow people to book their appointments online without needing to send a message or call a receptionist,
Mm,
which I think is a little bit unique for
yeah.
me
I like.
because at least as a consumer, I get very annoyed when I am required to do that.
Yeah.
Partially because I'm a night owl, and when I, am able to do that, and am in that mindset, they're closed.
Yeah.
Those businesses are closed.
Yeah.
So being able to to schedule appointments, kind of whenever not whenever, but they can schedule an appointment for business hours at
Sure.
midnight, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like so just being more flexible too. We tend to, and
Mhm.
we take ourselves so seriously. I love the name of your firm, right? That Purple Fox, just thinking outside the box, being human, being flexible, okay, not coming across like robots for heaven's sakes, and
Mhm.
looking for those best outcomes rather than just always arguing, as you said, I think is brilliant. I really like that. And why do you think so many lawyers and women in particular, I think, are still kind of leaving the practice in droves? And any suggestions about what we can do to make the practice more fulfilling for the profession?
I think that has to do with tradition for the most part. So the legal profession is traditionally male dominated. More than half, but now more than half of the law school graduates are female.
Yep.
So we are seeing equal representation in terms of, people who are becoming new lawyers.
Yeah.
But we still have a very male dominated, for at the partnership level,
Yep.
unfortunately. And why I say unfortunately is because peer review research has shown time and time again that diverse groups
Yeah.
accomplish more. They
Yeah.
get better results.
Yeah.
So if you have, all men that own a law firm, they can do better if they add a woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like statistically, they can
Yeah.
just by doing that one thing. It doesn't cause better results, but it's correlated with better
Yeah.
results.
Yeah, Google's done some great research on that. So, and obviously beyond the legal profession, right? I mean, groups with diversity invariably get higher productivity, better morale, better outcomes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the tension of the diversity that allows for greater creativity. And if you get the same people with the same thought process and the same conditioning, you're going to get the same outcomes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's time for a change. So I am totally with you on that. And I guess tied to that, what advice do you have for lawyers on how to get away from, because that traditional model that you speak of tends to be this soul sucking competitive model, right? Any advice you have for how to get away from that sort of competitive model to find a better way to practice?
I think that can be challenging in certain cities or counties due to, the number of lawyers that are in those locations. But
Mm.
I think where there's more competition, you might have a better time trying to find a practice or, just people that you can and want to work with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes that can just be, that can be a challenging process and it's going to be
Yeah.
different for everybody. Unfortunately for me, the pandemic kind of negated any job opportunities, but instead of dwelling on that, I created my own opportunity by
I love
creating
it.
my own law firm.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing something you love, which I gather you
Mhm.
do, right? I think so many lawyers go into either an expected path or the path
Mhm.
where they think they're going to make the most money. And I think it's so important. Find something you love, right? As corny as it is, love what you do what you love, and be looking for success in different ways. I think that's great. And
Or
any
at
tips?
least take steps to get to that point.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a shift. It's a mindset shift in the profession because the entire profession, the old school at least, is driving this way. And I think we are
Mhm.
seeing the newer generation at least being a little more insistent that they want more balance and they want a little
Mhm.
more passion in the practice. And speaking of, of passion, any tips on how to maintain passion for the practice? Having your own business, it can be a grind sometimes. What are some things you do to help maintain passion for your practice?
I was really, really bad at this for about the first year and working far, far too many hours in a week. But that was getting me closer and closer to burnout.
Yeah.
And I recognize this, and some trusted people in my life recognize this, and you know, we had some come to Jesus moments, I'll say. And I've since been a lot better about that. For
Yeah.
example, I don't always work on Saturday and Sunday. I might work a couple hours on the weekend,
Yeah.
but not the whole weekend.
Yeah.
And I'll schedule in breaks throughout the week so that I can just either do nothing or do something more planned, like get a manicure, pedicure, watch,
Yeah.
go see a movie in theaters, go see Barbie, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, and it's about prioritizing. It's funny 'cause my daughter and I created this planner together. It's called a purpose planner. And it's because when we were looking and she loves these agendas, right? And planners, but we both recognize that they all tend to be very to-do driven, right? Very task driven. And we're like, gosh, life is short and people need to live their life on
Mhm.
purpose. So we created this
Yes,
planner all about, what's one bold step I can take today towards my bigger vision and things like that to tap
I
in.
like that. I
Yeah,
like
and
that.
making sure that we've got balance in not just our career, but career, friends, family, growth, as you said, like mindset, like
Mhm.
making sure experiences in life, all of those different areas. So
It's hard. It's
yeah,
hard. It's a
yeah,
process.
and it takes intention, which when we get so caught up in that to-do mindset, we feel at least like there's not the time to give that the attention that it deserves. So yeah.
Mhm.
What's something
Yeah.
you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting?
That is a good question. I think it would have been extremely helpful to have more information about how to interview clients or
Mm,
potential clients,
yeah.
because sometimes getting information, at least I'm getting better at it, but at least at the very beginning of starting my practice, sometimes it felt like I was pulling teeth to get basic information.
Yeah.
So maybe, having more information about that, an elective class or something in law school, something a little bit more practical than, read page X to X and we'll talk about
Yes.
it.
Yeah. That's great advice. I mean, I'm sure things have changed or maybe not, obviously, because you're saying it's still nothing about that in the entire law school experience, like zero. And it's funny you say that because I know my associates, I remember them always being so surprised when they sat in on interview meetings with me, right? Whether the client interview or witness interviews or whatever, because
Hmm.
I pushed, right? Like to get,
Hmm.
I don't want that surprise to be when they're on the stand in cross-examination and then it's done. Like
Hmm.
I want all the skeletons out of the closet, right? So
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
yeah.
Guess we're not supposed to ask questions we don't already know the answer to.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't subscribe to that on the stand, maybe, but when I'm in that interview room, I want to know the good, the bad, the ugly. So
Hmm.
I love it.
Yes.
Maybe not in criminal. That's maybe a little different, but even then, I'm not sure.
True. True.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not in that world either.
Yeah. So Alyssa, where can our listeners find you? Where do you want them to go to find out more about your practice?
So they can go to our website at purplefoxlegal.com, and we have a number of resources on that website. We have some ebooks, some blog articles, and we actually just launched a new contract template shop
Nice.
for those who are not quite ready to hire an attorney but need some sort of legal protection.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. I'll check that out myself and we'll make sure to put that in the show notes for all of our listeners there. And thanks so much, Alyssa, for joining us and being so open in the conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for inviting me again. And yes, I'm sure your listener will have a lot of gold nuggets to take away from this conversation.
Yes, I absolutely. I'm sure you have helped up level people in their experience in the law, and we could all use more of that. So for all of our listeners out there too, if you haven't done it yet, make sure to grab a copy of my book, The Art of Feminine Negotiation. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose, find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Until next time, take care.